Tuesday, December 23, 2025. Ukraine ammunition supply on agenda as Czech leaders meet January 7 Reuters. The single meeting could cut Kyiv off from nearly half its vital artillery supplies. The fight for Ukraine's front lines is about to move to Prague Castle. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Ariat and the latest Deep Dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we are covering, well, what might be the most critical geopolitical decision facing Central Europe this holiday season. The new Czech government is threatening to stop the world's most successful, if secretive, military aid program for Ukraine.
And our mission in this deep dive is really to give you the full picture. We're going to break down the Czech ammunition initiative, what it is, why it works so well when other efforts, frankly, faltered. And we'll get into the strategic and economic forces that are now colliding around its future. We are looking at a really dramatic, almost immediate political earthquake under the new prime minister, Andrej Babiš, one that could leave a devastating supply gap on the Ukrainian front lines.
And here's the immediate cliffhanger you need to know right up front. We've just learned that the outgoing government successfully met its 2025 goal of delivering a staggering 1.8 million large-caliber shells. That's an achievement that, fundamentally reshaped the war's dynamics this year. But the incoming government calls the scheme rotten and is openly aligning with anti-aid allies. The fate of nearly half of Ukraine's projected 2026 artillery supply. It all hinges on a single meeting next month.
Okay, so before we get into the politics, let's just define what we're talking about. This thing, analysts have dubbed the Prague pipeline. It was launched back in early 2024 to solve really the West's biggest supply problem, which was the slow pace of its own industrial production. It's a rapid, agile coordination mechanism.
So it's not like the Czech Republic was making all of this themselves. The crucial element, the thing that made it work, was that it used funds from Western donor nations, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, to basically go on a global shopping spree for shells.
Exactly, largely from non-aligned third countries. It created this nimble, almost gray market procurement network. It was a critical lifeline that bypassed all the slow indigenous EU production ramp-ups. It was fast, it was flexible, and crucially, it was designed to plug the exact hole that Ukrainian forces were facing, which was a critical ammunition shortage.
But wait a second, 1.8 million shells is a huge number. I mean, why did this one initiative succeed so spectacularly when the entire European Union was struggling to meet its own much smaller goal? What did the Czechs do differently?
It really boils down to two things: the money and the secrecy. The donors put up about $4.5 billion for the scheme, so that gave it immediate purchasing power. But the secrecy, that was the real key. The goal was 1.8 million shells in 2025, and they hit it. That represents something like 43% of all large-caliber ammo supplied to Kyiv this year. To get that kind of volume, you just can't rely on your usual friendly nations.
Okay, so you're saying the secret sauce was this clandestine sourcing, and that very secrecy is exactly what the new government is now using as a political weapon against it.
Precisely. The logistics involved a complex chain of intermediaries. They were acquiring munitions from all over the world, but especially the Balkans and Southeast Asia. And here's where it gets really interesting for you. Many of these source nations are politically very hesitant to provoke Russia directly. They want the money from the sale, but they don't want the diplomatic headache.
So how did the Czech government get around that?
They basically took on the political risk themselves. The Czech Ministry of Defense was often listed as the official end user on the paperwork. This means Czechia guaranteed to the seller that the shells were going into their military stockpiles, not directly to a war zone. It facilitates the transfer, even if everyone, knew the ultimate destination was Ukraine. This layer of discretion is what made the whole pipeline work. But it also creates the exact opening for the Babiš government to attack the initiative as opaque.
That sets the stage perfectly for the political pivot we're seeing in Prague right now. You have this incredibly successful, if discreet, operation running, and then enter Andrej Babiš.
Right. Andrej Babiš, a populist billionaire, he officially returned as prime minister on December 9th. His ANO party won a decisive plurality in the October elections, about 34.5% of the vote. And his return isn't just a standard change in government, it's a complete ideological U-turn for the country's foreign policy.
A U-turn feels like an understatement. What happens when a country's foreign policy just reverses course overnight like this?
Well, under the previous prime minister, Petr Fiala, Czechia was one of the most proactive, pro-Western, pro-Ukraine allies. Babiš is steering the country toward this regional populist bloc. He's aligning with Hungary's Viktor Orbán and Slovakia's Robert Fico. Both of whom have taken these, let's say, neutral or even anti-aid stances toward Kyiv. Babiš and his coalition's agenda is explicitly Czechs first. It's all about domestic issues, like electricity prices, and actively avoiding foreign military commitments.
And his coalition partners, they just amplify this shift, don't they? He's in government with the right-wing motorists for themselves, or OIDO, and the far-right Freedom and Direct Democracy, the SPD, and together they have a solid majority, 108 seats out of 200.
And you really have to understand how radical some of these partners are. The SPD, for example, is deeply Eurosceptic. They question Czechia's future in both the EU and NATO. The sources we have highlight that they also openly call for the expulsion of most of the 380,000 Ukrainian refugees in the country, and some of their members have been caught repeating Russian propaganda lines. So in that political environment, continuing this pro-Ukraine pipeline becomes, well, toxic.
So if Babia knows this pipeline is not only critical for European defense, but also a huge moneymaker for Czech industry, why risk all that international fallout? Is this whole corruption claim just a smokescreen?
That's the core tension, isn't it? He's admitted the program was, and I quote, certainly a good thing for Ukraine, but he repeatedly attacks it in public as opaque and overpriced, raising questions about corruption. For him, that critique does a few things at once. It pleases his hardline anti-aid allies, that aligns him with that regional populist movement, and it makes him look like a strong domestic reformer fighting the deep state.
So he's taking a legitimate concern. I mean, complex arms deals are always at risk of corruption, and he's leveraging it to justify a massive policy shift that helps him politically.
Exactly. And that shift is now being forced into the open on one specific date.
All eyes are on January 7th.
The fate of this entire initiative hangs on the State Security Council meeting scheduled for January 7, 2026. Babiš has promised he will present the government's definitive position on the program at that meeting.
But you have this new hardline government, and then you have this massive pro-Western voice still operating right there in Prague Castle, President Petr Pavel.
Right, and he's a major player here. President Pavel is an independent, and he's the former chairman of the NATO Military Committee. He's a powerful advocate for the aid. He's become Babiš's main political opponent on this. He's warned that halting support would damage Czechia's credibility and, importantly, jeopardize his future role in Ukraine's reconstruction.
And it seems like Babiš is already trying to consolidate power ahead of this meeting, right? The internal dynamics look pretty tense.
The tension is palpable. The sources noted that the new defense minister, Jaromír Zuna, who's an SPD nominee, mind you, he initially confirmed the initiative would continue. He called support for Ukraine self-evident. And that was a huge relief for Western partners. But almost immediately, he was ordered to stop making public comments on it. The Prime Minister's office is now centralizing all communication related to Ukraine. It speaks volumes.
It really brings us back to that question, doesn't it? Is this genuinely about fighting corruption, or is he just using the transparency argument as a lever to grab complete political control over foreign policy?
It definitely looks like a political power play. One designed to give him maximum leverage, both at home with his partners and internationally with the donor nations.
Okay, let's pivot to the economic paradox here, because this is where the political rhetoric just completely falls apart. While Babiš is out there criticizing the cost and the lack of transparency, this initiative has created a massive economic boom at home.
It's the single biggest contradiction in the whole story. The Czech defense industry doesn't see this as charity. For them, it is a highly profitable national export project. The demand for those 1.8 million shells, the logistics, the coordination, it all translated directly into huge corporate growth and jobs in the Czech Republic. The money the West poured in didn't just flow out. It supercharged Czech manufacturing.
And we have a perfect example of that. The Czechoslovak group, CSG, the largest private defense company there, saw its revenue surge by 193% in 2024. 193%.
And that explosion in revenue was driven almost entirely by the ammunition initiative. It's fueling everything from large caliber shell production to logistics vehicles. So now the arms industry is lobbying the government, basically arguing that whatever the politics are, this mechanism that brings in all this profit must be preserved. It's an economic imperative.
So Babiš is in a terrible bind. Kill the initiative, and he cuts off the revenue stream his Czech's first government desperately needs, or continue it, and he alienates the very coalition partners who put him in power. So what are the likely scenarios for this January 7th meeting? How could this play out for Ukraine?
Well, the scenarios that analysts are looking at all involve Babiš trying to have his cake and eat it too, keep the profit while shedding the political risk. There are three main paths we could see.
Okay, let's hear them. What's scenario A? You've dubbed it institutional mummification.
This is probably the most damaging one for Kyiv in the short term. Bobby could launch these deep, bureaucratic transparency audits into the whole procurement chain. This would satisfy his coalition's demands to root out supposed corruption. And, let's be fair, high-speed gray market deals do have structural risks. But in practice, these audits would slow the flow of ammunition to a trickle. The system gets mummified. It's still technically alive, but the speed and flexibility that made it work are gone. It's a de facto cancellation.
A death by 1,000 cuts. Okay, what about scenario B, the NATO handover?
Babisha has openly suggested this one. He could transfer the whole coordination role to NATO. This is a brilliant move for him politically. Czechia keeps the industrial revenue because its companies are still selling the shells. But he offloads the political liability and the heavy lifting of securing the donor funding onto NATO or the broader European community.
But if NATO takes over, doesn't that solve the problem for Ukraine?
Not necessarily. The biggest risk here is speed. NATO's procurement rules are consensus-driven, they're bureaucratic, and they are slow. They require levels of transparency that would make the current clandestine sourcing from third-party nations totally impossible. The pipeline would likely just dry up because the source nations would back out.
So in both of those scenarios, the flow of ammunition slows way down or stops. What's the third option? The diplomatic pivot.
This is the high-stakes political one. The initiative itself becomes a tool for international leverage. Analysts suggest he could align the initiative's future with potential peace negotiations, maybe ones pushed by the current U.S. administration.
So turning the ammunition supply from a military tool into a diplomatic bargaining chip.
Exactly. The flow of shells might be paused or made conditional. It could be linked directly to demands for a ceasefire or other political goals. And that would instantly elevate this January 7th decision from a Czech domestic issue to a critical piece of global diplomacy for the next year.
And if the Czech Republic does end its leadership role, or if the whole thing is mummified, Ukraine stands to lose nearly half of its projected artillery supply. That is the core takeaway here, the number we have to keep coming back to.
It's a massive, immediate deficit that cannot be quickly filled. No other single country is ready to step in and fill that void, especially for the Soviet-caliber munitions that Ukraine still desperately needs. The West bet big on this mechanism. If it fails, it's an immediate strategic victory for Russia.
So what does this all mean for the bigger picture?
What's so fascinating is that this conflict in Prague is really a microcosm of a much bigger European debate. It's about solidarity versus sovereignty. It asks the question, what happens when national economic self-interest, feeding a booming arms industry and funding populist social programs, clashes directly with geopolitical necessity? That necessity being maintaining a robust defense supply line to Ukraine, the new government has to decide which of those is more important. And we have to leave you with this provocative question to think about. If the new Czech government decides that national profit justifies continuing these arms sales through its own companies, even if they strategically remove the country's name from the official international initiative, is that genuine solidarity with Ukraine? Or is it just clever capitalism weaponized for foreign policy? That's the decision Babiel will reveal on January 7th.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Arya, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.